All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So I want to welcome everyone to the 7th session of the RPOA Virtual Free Real Estate Investor and Landlord Conference, featuring national speakers on some of the hottest topics in real estate investment. Today, we're going to discuss how you can successfully invest in multifamily real estate. And during our expert panel discussion today, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box and or vote on the questions you'd most like to have answered. So we'll be answering your questions in the order of which ones receive the top votes. And afterward, we invite you to hang out and join us for more networking at your table, or you can skip around to other tables, just as if you were at an in-person conference. And I want to take this moment to thank all of our sponsors, especially our main sponsor, Western Star Insurance, along with Boathouse Commercial Funding Group, Allison Coetsier from Compass Realty Services, Culver CPA Group, and Noel Saluski Agency. Thank you for supporting this event. Before we get started with our panel, we are going to have a brief presentation that will benefit local rental property owners in the city of Grand Rapids. Housing rehabilitation specialist Ken Holton and the RPOA's Get the Let Out grant program coordinator, Kathy Bartnick, are both here to discuss how you can receive financial assistance from the Get the Let Out grant program to make your Grand Rapids rental to make your Grand Rapids rental property lead safe. That's what I'm trying to say. Ken and Kathy, can you come join me on stage here? All right, there you are. Let's hear it. Let's make sure your microphone's working.
Hi, everybody.
All right, Kathy and Ken, go ahead and take it away. I'm going to go off to the side here.
All right, awesome. I'm going to introduce Ken really quick, and I'm just going to move the camera to me a little bit just so you guys can hear me because we got to be super close in here. So hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Brian, for the introduction. I want to talk to you real briefly before our expert panel comes on. We just want to let you know of a program that's available. It's through the City of Grand Rapids. It's the Get the Let Out grant program. So obviously, houses built before 1978, we had lead paint, and that has created some lead hazards, which has affected children mostly, and they have been being poisoned. And what we want to do is offer some information and a program to you that can help you. And why would you want to even participate in this? Saving children's lives, number one, protecting the kids from the lead poisoning, protecting your investment, and then also just increasing the value of your rental home because you're going to be able to get some things fixed. So you can apply for up to $20,000 for one dwelling, for window siding and doors. And Ken's going to talk a little bit about that later, about how that works with what actually gets picked to get fixed and what needs it. I just want to talk to you about the qualifications really quick. So we're not going to take question and answers today, but what we have put my email and Ken's email in the chat, the general chat. You can call the RPO office at 616-454-3385 if you want more information, or you can jump on our website and you can contact anyone from our office and we can send you more information. We can get you the application to apply. But we wanted to just briefly tell you the points of what you have to do to qualify. So the first thing is, for this particular program, you have to be in the city of Grand Rapids. So there's other programs available, but the only thing we're talking about today is just for Grand Rapids. The rental must be pre-1978. And so the rents must be set at fair market rent. And I want to give you an example of that. So for a 2-bedroom apartment, the fair market rate is going to be $994. For a 3-bedroom, it's going to be $1,309. And then it can be adjusted with utilities, and we can go into all that later if you need more information. But that's what you would have to set your rents at to participate. And the other thing is that the income of the tenant is not to exceed 80% of the area median income. So I'm going to give you an example of that too, just real quick, so you have this information. So if you have 2 people applying, they can't exceed $51,000. If you have 4 people applying for your rental, they can't make more than $64,000. So that's just some general numbers for you to see if you would be close to qualifying. And then the next and the most important one is you have to have a child under 6 living or going to be living in your rental. You can use the program for a vacant apartment. You just have to agree to market to a family, and we've got the verbiage from Fair Housing that's blessed so that you can say, hey, I'm marketing to families, because normally you can't do that, but in this program that you can, and we can help you with that. So those are the qualifications. So once you're ready to do the application, you're going to fill out the application, and we can help with that. You need to have a few things ready so it goes smooth. You need to show proof of the insurance on the rental. You need to show proof that your taxes are paid up to date when you apply. And then you have to have proof of ownership, the deed. Is it more than one owner? Is there an LLC? So that's got to be very clear, and everyone's got to be on board and sign on for this program. And then you fill that out, and you're going to take it down to Grand Rapids. And then I'm going to have Ken is just going to talk a little bit about what are the next steps, the time frame for what happens after you apply.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing great. So after we get you approved, at least as a landlord, then we will send your tenant out an application, make sure they qualify for the same. And then we will go out and do the initial inspection on your home. And what we do at that time is give you a generic, based on past practices, how much we think the project's going to cost. It's not this project's not free for landlords. Landlords either pay 10 or 20%, depending on if you're having siding. If you need a full siding job, then landlords pay 20% of the project. If you if you don't need exterior siding, then they pay 10. But then after we do that and everybody agrees to move forward, we get a $300 copay and order the risk assessment. The risk assessor comes out and checks your property for all lead hazards, and those have to be addressed. They check windows, doors, walls. Any painted surface is fair game. We also check the exterior soil. After we get the risk assessment back, we write the specifications, put it out to bid. Once we get the bids back, we sign contracts and request your part of the copay. After the contract signed, right now, those of you that have bought any windows lately know that they went from a 2-week lead time to now a 2-month lead time. So after and windows and siding is what most landlords are really looking for. So that right there can put, that can make these projects drag on just a little bit. It's not necessarily increasing the cost. The cost of the windows have only went up 14% during this COVID thing. I'm sure some of you guys have seen the OSB prices go up crazy. Those are starting to drop back down as well. But from the start, whenever we get the risk assessment back, you're looking at about 2 to 3 months before the interior work starts, and we will relocate your tenants at no additional cost to you. Typically 5 to 10 days is normal. We also give them a stipend. Then after the work's done, they can move back. The exterior they can be in during the project. And what does the city get for this? They get a period of affordability for 3 to 5 years. 3 years if there's a child under the age of 6 for at least 9 months on site, and 5 years if, like, let's say we did a vacant unit and you never put a child under the age of 6 in there. The city doesn't expect you to go broke trying to get this thing rented. But we do expect you to affirmatively market and follow by the rules and the guidelines of the program. Am I missing anything?
All right. I think that's about it, guys. So if you have any questions, let us know. You can contact us here at the office, 616-454-3385. You can email us. We have the application here, and we can get you more information. It's a great opportunity. Look into it, see if you qualify, and call the office. All right, Brian, back to you.
Great. Thank you for that, Kathy and Ken. Appreciate the information. Before you go, I know it's not a Q&A, but we do have one quick question from the audience. Does this apply to owner occupied homes?
Yes, it does. They have to be low income as well. It's a little bit different with owner occupied. It's a full grant with them. One thing I didn't mention, we also do a healthy homes review. And for landlords and homeowners alike, there are some things that we can address. With landlords, it's more typically oriented more towards what the tenant's needs are. Like if you need some band board insulation, maybe the tenant is has some breathing, asthmatic or something like that, then we might do some flooring. We wouldn't necessarily address code violations, if you will, but if it's something geared towards the tenant, we could do that. But in answer to your question, yes, owner occupieds are eligible too.
Thank you very much for that information.
All right. Thank you. See ya.
All right, let's get started with the multifamily panel presentation here. So multifamily and apartments have been on a tear lately. Sales volume and pricing have been high, and many investors and experts see this trend continuing for years. Still, others are concerned about the effects of the pandemic, especially concerning inflation and a tenant's ability to pay rent. Some wonder if housing and apartment prices are a bubble waiting to pop. We've gathered our own panel of experts today, experts and investors, to help us make sense of what's happening right now in the apartment investing world from a national, local, and financing perspective. So it's my honor to introduce them right now, starting with Matt Jones. Matt is the Vice President of the Michigan National Multifamily Advisory Group with Colliers International. His career transaction volume exceeds $500 million in multifamily properties throughout the Midwest, and he currently has over $150 million in properties on the market or in escrow currently. Matt's personal property investment portfolio has grown to include roughly 500 units. Matt, thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and look forward to an exciting panel discussion.
Awesome. Thanks. So you know what I think I'll do? I'm going to change up my rhythm a little bit, but I'm going to, since you're getting the first question anyway, I'm going to start with your question, and then I'll introduce each panelist. We have 4 panelists all together, and I'll introduce them and ask a question as I introduce them. So Matt, you get the first question today.
Keep me on my toes. I like it.
Yeah, I'm changing it up on you here at the last minute, but I think it makes sense. And Matt, because you have such a nationwide national perspective and global perspective, because you work with Colliers, I want to start on that macro level and take a look at the national outlook on apartment investing. And since you're Vice President with Colliers International, I'd love it if you could give us your insight as to how apartment investors have weathered the pandemic and where you see this asset class heading.
So yeah, to your point, overall, apartment investing has become kind of the place where everybody wants to be. I think it was previously, but COVID, I think, really put a lot of capital into the multifamily market that historically was maybe an office investor or a retail investor or a hospitality investor. Obviously, because of the pandemic, there were some challenges in those sectors. And, for the most part, multifamily has held up really well. The National Multi-Housing Council has tracked over the last 18 months, on a monthly basis, collections across their, investor base. And I think most recently they were reporting collections across the nation at like 95%. So I think that if you certainly look at, there are some challenging sectors where tenancy maybe has been affected more by COVID, jobs, et cetera, that can't pay their rent. But by and large, across the country, macro level, and in Michigan as well, people are continuing to pay their rent. And, the other thing that's really sort of buoyed our industry that is a differentiator for every other industry is the availability of GSE debt. So Fannie, Freddie, HUD, you can still go get, I got a quote this morning on a project that we're working on at 3.13% for a 10-year term at 80% leverage, non-recourse, with 2 or 3 years of interest only. So, you can pay, and we'll talk about cap rates, I'm sure, at some point, but the cap rates have continued to compress across the country. But you can make sense of a 4.5 or a 5 cap if your debt's at 3 or 3.5% because you still have that positive leverage. So.
Thank you for that. I have follow-up questions, but I'll hit you with the follow-up question after I introduce the rest of our panelists today. Our next panelist is, sorry, let me find my place here in the script, Charlie Geil. Charlie is the principal of Twin Oaks Capital, an asset management, consulting, and private lending agency. And Charlie has transacted over $140 million in small and medium-sized multifamily, and he's owned and operated as many as 200 units. Charlie, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Brian.
So the question I have for you to start with is that there's definitely a lot of investors who in the West Michigan apartment market, this market and inventory has always traditionally been tight, as it has been in many places around the country. However, I know that you are very good at finding rare opportunities and off-market deals and finding those opportunities. And I'm wondering if you can share with us and our audience what an investor needs to do to find more opportunities in this market.
I think I with so much information out on the internet right now, I think sometimes people overcomplicate things. So I try to find as few of different metrics as possible that really, because I get this question all the time. And be honest, I'm not trying to get more efficient with answering this question myself. And what I came up with is it really comes down to basically 3 factors to invest in real estate and even multi specifically. And it comes down to time, knowledge, and capital. Now, the investors that I find that do well, they find a way to leverage those 3. Now, they might have only a lot of capital, but no time and knowledge, but they will find a way to leverage their unfair advantage. And that could even be through relationships. So you could be having access to capital, access to time. And I'll give you kind of an example here. So I have a client recently taken on where they have a very serious unfair advantage that they have a very high net worth income, and they also have a very large, close to 7-figure balance. So they can be buying properties cash. And so one of the first things we discussed with them was, I want to buy conventional financing and do all these things. And one of the things we had to talk about leveraging is like, if you have capital, we should be leveraging cash offers and then turning around and refinancing versus offering with financing and then not distinguishing yourself amongst 10 or 15 offers. So those would be the big things that you're always trying to leverage those 3 things. And you have an unfair advantage in one of those 3 aspects, whether it's through relationships or just personally, they need to be leveraged. So basically time, knowledge, and capital.
Breaking it down like that, I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Frederick St. Moore. Frederick is a commercial loan executive with Boathouse Commercial Funding Group. He helps business owners and investors of all sizes get the capital they need when they need it with the best terms possible. And Frederick is also a former U.S. Army Ranger, and he's responsible for leading a sales team to over $1.5 billion in annual sales. Fred, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
Now, I know that lenders have really tightened their loan qualifications when COVID started, and they were requiring more liquidity and reserves from their borrowers. Has this eased up, and what is the appetite from lenders for multifamily right now?
It has eased up. some programs were even are more aggressive for multifamily than pre-COVID. Hospitality is still tough, retail is still tough, office space is tough, but multifamily, the appetite, the market's looking for the transactions. They want the transaction, and the money's available for the transactions. Yep.
Great. Well, that's good to know it's there. I know you do all kinds of loans. How much of the multifamily and apartments have you seen lately?
It's about a third of our business right now. It seems with the rates staying low, the housing prices going higher, it's pushing up the cost to own a home, which is again helping out to raise rents and whatnot. So we're seeing a bunch of like fix and flip transactions on those where we they take down a multifamily. They do some cosmetic repairs, nothing big, no real ripping out kitchens, and then they restabilize it with higher rents and come back and refinance it. So it's hot right now. Absolutely.
So that value add investing is really big at the moment.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to introduce our fourth panelist, Diane Whitaberry. Diane is a local real estate investor and multifamily owner and manager. She currently manages over 50 units in the Grand Rapids area and specializes in all facets of property management, including marketing, leasing, tenant relations, and maintenance. She and her husband, Steve, have been local real estate investors for over 15 years and have a wide variety of investment experience, including flips, buy and hold, wholesaling, and property management. Outside of real estate, Diane enjoys spending time with her family and grandchildren. Diane, thanks for being with us today. And you're muted still, so click your audio button there.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks for being here. So my first question for you, Diane, is that I know we've all heard a lot of operators complain that their tenants have stopped paying rent because of the pandemic and eviction, foreclosure, moratorium, all that, while others, like myself, are seeing our delinquencies at an all-time low. So there's mixed messages coming out there in the market right now and mixed experiences. What are you seeing on the ground as someone who works directly with tenants, and what types of conversations are you having regarding the payment of rent?
We have not seen the rent not coming in at all. All of our tenants have been paying rent. We had a couple of tenants who had to use the COVID relief fund, but other than that, we're full up and everybody's paying rent.
And do you think that this is unique to Grand Rapids, or have you heard of people in Grand Rapids or locally having a different experience, having trouble collecting the rent from their tenants?
Boy, I don't really know. I think Grand Rapids is kind of a unique place because people like living here. There's a need for housing here. I just haven't seen it. We have not experienced people not paying rent for us.
That's great to hear, and I'm seeing the same thing. Have you had, like, when you do have a tenant who comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm having trouble paying rent," what are those conversations like? Like, what do you say on your part?
Like I said, we've only had 2 people. The first one just went out and found the COVID relief fund herself. The second one had just had a baby, so she was having trouble there. And I recommended going to the COVID relief fund, told her how to get a hold of them. And she's in the process now of going through that. So
it's really just communication, making sure
correct.
They talked to you, told you they were having trouble, and you helped them find the relief that is out there right now. Okay, excellent. Thanks. So thank you all for being here. And I want to, before we get into more questions, I just want to remind everyone who is watching this right now, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A tab there. And I'll be paying attention to that as we go along and asking questions, that are on topic with what we're talking about. And you can also vote for the question. So if you see a question that you want to answer, answered as well, vote for it. The ones that get the top votes are the ones that I'll be sure to ask. But the Q&A is open now, so feel free to put those in there. And Matt, I want to go back to you with a follow-up question about just the overall outlook on apartments, because I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of money pouring into this space. And then on the flip side, there's a lot of investors who might be waiting on the sideline for it all to crash and that perceived bubble to pop. And I'm wondering if you can give us any guidance here as to whether there really is a bubble or if this is just going to sustain and keep cranking along.
Well, first, I'll answer with a typical broker response, which is do your own research, and I make no representations or warranties with my answer. But I don't think, I mean, it's a supply and demand issue, and we don't have enough supply, both in Grand Rapids and nationally. We're like, I think nationally over 3 million units short of what the demand is around the country. And because of construction, labor shortages, hard goods costs, shipping, construction in general, it doesn't make, the numbers don't pencil out right now to build projects. And so that's why you're seeing rents go up. I pulled some research this morning, and I think nationally, well, in the state of Michigan, the year-over-year rent growth was like 9%. Some of that's a little bit of an anomaly because nobody raised rents last year, but and so it's kind of baked in. But I don't see any cracks in the foundation that would suggest that we're headed towards another bubble. So I think the question is, if you're waiting on the sidelines, you know, what is your money doing for you if it's sitting in a checking account making 0.01%? And so, you know, if you can go get a 5 or 6 or 7% yield on a multifamily asset with non-recourse debt, I just, to me, that's a great long-term investment that eventually, yes, things are going to come crashing down. I don't have the crystal ball to know what the catalyst is, but I don't think, you know, multifamily, especially retail, has been impacted by technology, Amazon, etc. People always need a clean, safe place to live, and I don't know that technology is ever going to be able to supplant that. So to me, it's sort of the safest of the asset classes. And that's why I think you're seeing this rush from especially institutional capital and high net worth investors right now, you know, into the space, and even more so into the Midwest from the coast, because, you know, it's perceived as a value here. I know it sounds crazy, but we're selling a deal in Lansing right now that's it's roughly a $75 million transaction. It'll sell for a 4.5 cap, and the 3 or 4 investors who are in best and final on that think that a 4.5 cap is a phenomenal deal because they're used to paying 3.5 caps in Austin or Charlotte or Nashville, places like that. So I think your worldview matters, and sometimes we get caught up in just looking at the world through the lens with which we view it and not considering how other people sort of view investment decisions. And people say, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But if you're used to paying a 3 cap and now all of a sudden you can get a 4.5 cap for a brand new property, pretty good deal to them.
And then just as a follow-up, players, what is their perspective? Have they put a timeline on this? Like, do they see this continuing for the next couple of years, or are they not commenting on their crystal ball?
Yeah, we're nationally and internationally, we're bullish and continue to be bullish on multifamily. 40% of the transactions, capital markets transactions in the United States of America thus far in 2021 have been apartment assets. So it just sort of speaks to the demand in that space and the amount of capital that's being put into that space. As a perfect example, Capital Square, who's one of the largest DSTs in the country, and we work with quite a bit around the country. They're raising $100 million a month, and they can't find enough transactions to place it. And that's one of 50 large DSTs in the country. And so the issue is there's not enough deals to trade. There's way more capital than deals. And so, to Charlie's point, it's like, how do you figure out how to get in front of a transaction or not be, in a competitive environment or leverage a relationship or whatever it may be? Because, if you're paying market right now, it's going to be expensive.
Thank you. Fred, a similar question to you from a lending perspective. What is the long-term outlook from a lending perspective, and how do you see interest rates and possibly inflation affecting that?
At the convention, so I'm in Vegas right now talking exactly about that question. So the long-term 3 to 5 year outlook is that there's going to be capital in this space and capital looking to be invested in this space. And to Matt's point, there's an excess of capital. So we see when there's an excess of capital, we'll see the rates staying lower. On a whole supply and demand type model. So the money's going to be there. The products, they're coming out with more and more products to entice different borrowers, different sponsors to get their business. So it's a great space to be in right now.
The different products that are coming out to stay competitive with other lenders, like what could we anticipate? Like we're all somewhat familiar with the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac type terms, but are there more creative terms on the horizon?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So say you have a 20-unit apartment that does need rehab and it does need to be restabilized with higher rents. We'll take the purchase price plus the rehab funds and lend up to 85% of that, or what's called 85% of loan to cost. So you'll get the money to purchase, and then the rehab of a 20-unit apartment works just like a rehab of a single family. You do the work and get reimbursed, do the work, getting reimbursed, restabilize along the way, and then you can come back through with non-Freddie, non-Fannie financing, which is probably 1% higher than Fannie, Freddie, but we don't need all the documentation, and we underwrite the building more than we do the individual. So another one, I've done 2 last month and another one this month, which is a bridge loan where we're taking, to Charlie's point, of needing the capital. Well, we're bridging several properties for the down payment on the multifamily. So we can encumber your current rental, the equity currently in your rental properties, and apply it for the down payment for the multifamily, and again get it restabilized and then refinance it back out. So it's a sought after asset right now, and we can get super creative with it.
And did I hear you correctly say that there are loan programs out there that will provide up to 85% of the acquisition and improvement cost of
loan to cost? Yeah. Loan to cost.
Wow. Yep. Okay. That's good to know. That's a pretty high ratio there.
Oh.
Excellent. Charlie, I want to ask you a similar question.
Brian, I want to clarify before I get a whole bunch of emails. It's for highly qualified sponsors with experience, with reserves and capital that are trying to preserve their capital for other investments. It's not for the person who just Googled how to buy an apartment. And I got a call 2 days ago. The guy wants to buy 40 units, never invested before, and has no money. So it's like, well, so do I. I want to buy that 40 unit too. But for that program that I spoke about, 85% loan to cost, that's for highly qualified borrower sponsors with liquidity and reserves. Yep.
Yeah, it's not like 12 years ago when they were just giving money out to anyone who log a mirror, right?
Right.
You got to have a track record and some experience and money behind you.
Yeah.
Charlie, I want to ask you a similar question about, is there a bubble? Is this going to continue, and get your perspective? Because I know you're out there buying. You've acquired recently, or you have some stuff under contract. And I'm wondering, what your perspective is on that bigger overall question. How long will this continue?
So for myself personally, I definitely have gotten a little bit more conservative. Over the years, I've done a really good job of dollar cost averaging. And so simply what that means is basically that if I buy one property a year over the course of 20 years, yes, I might have some of those properties that are purchased at the down part of the cycle, but there's also a good chance that now I also have a lot of properties that will have that purchase the high cycle. So regardless of what I purchase, if I'm evenly kind of spacing that out, that will help prevent me from being too overexposed to one part of the cycle. So that's one thing I try to consistently do more of. And then the second thing as well is that I think people often are too focused on cap rates. And, one of the things I tell my clients with cap rates is that cap rates are a reflection of the return. So I actually see the question, what is a cap rate? It's net operating income essentially divided by the purchase price. Well, the problem with that, though, is that cap rate is also a reflection of the risk as well. So if I am buying a property in Grand Rapids at a 6 cap, that doesn't mean that it's a worse investment than if I buy a property in some small town in Michigan that only has 200 people and very low job stability. Yes, I could buy a 20 cap there, but what is the likelihood that in a recession they'll still perform at a 20 cap? So myself personally, I know I've been focused on higher quality assets that I believe are more recession resistant. I've been on record with many of my clients that say I would personally like to overpay slightly in West Michigan than pay market in a other market, as well as, and take a lower cap rate. And I think if we look at the metrics for Grand Rapids, there's so many things that are going our way. You look at the last recession, a lot of people expected that we would have poor collection rate. And actually what happened was collection rate actually went down briefly. It went up. And then on top of that, we had so much inflation with all the money flooding into the economy. And so, you look at March of last year, we were scheduled to have $2.1 trillion flood the economy all of last year, get printed by the government. Instead, we had $3 trillion hit the economy basically in 1 month alone. All that, I believe, is going to lead to inflation. So to kind of hand on Matt and Diane and what everybody else said too as well, I think that it leads us to a point that if we do have some type of recession, I think it's going to be more in the availability of financing, but I don't think it's going to affect the performance of the assets as much as people think, specifically because of the reasons that are stated. One, I think there's going to be government intervention to help with collections. And two, I think there's going to be significant rent growth because of inflation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Diane, I have a kind of a two-part question for you. And it regarding the, is there a bubble? What's the outlook? What is your outlook as an investor? I know you and Steve acquired recently. Are you still out there making offers? Are you looking to buy more, or do you feel that prices are just too high right now?
Well, Steve and I are both very conservative in what we purchase. We feel like the prices are a little bit high, but if we found a good deal, we still would purchase it. So we are still looking, just haven't found anything that we were really interested in. Another thing that we really like is to buy local. We like to be able to drive by our investment to say, to keep an eye on it. So since we do self-manage at this point, that's very beneficial for us to have them more local so that we can go and take care of the needs there, the needs of the tenants, the needs of the properties.
Yeah, and then the second part of my question has to do with the tenants and rent. And Charlie, you mentioned that rents are going up and inflation is only going to drive it up even more. I'm wondering if you're seeing that on the ground, Diane. Are you seeing that you're able to increase your rents to levels that you haven't seen before, or are tenants still paying what they were paying 5 years ago?
No, tenants rent definitely has gone up over the last few years, especially in some of our downtown properties. We do rent to a lot of college students, and the rents there have definitely gone up. In our 20 unit that we purchased, as people move out, we are renovating their properties, and the rent goes up quite a bit there. And during the first year of owning our 20 unit, we did not raise rents at all because of COVID, but we are now in the process of raising them a little bit every year to kind of make up for the rent, I guess, deficiency that they're paying now, because rents were very low there when we bought the property.
And how is your occupancy? Because I'm noticing in my portfolio that my occupancy has really improved in most of my properties. And not just that, but the delinquency has gone down and the rent income is going up. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yes. Yeah. We're 100% full with everything that we have. Mm-hmm. So we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, definitely the conditions are very good on the ground. Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump over to some Q&A questions here because I see there's one that's already received 5 votes. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and you can also vote on other people's questions. This question is, I have $80,000 to invest. I could double that amount with a non-recourse loan. What would be the best way to put that to work in the greater Grand Rapids area? And Charlie, let's start with you for answering that question.
So, so by the fact that he's saying could double that with a non-recourse loan, I assume this is an IRA backed loan. So they're basically getting 60-40 or 50-50 LTV. I don't mind those type of assets, but the problem is that when you invest in real estate through an IRA, one of the biggest reasons why you invest in real estate is for tax benefits like depreciation. So when you're investing through your IRA, you're kind of doing it twice. So I'm taking depreciation to reduce my taxable income, but then I'm putting in the IRA, which is not getting taxed until I take it out anyways. So I'm not sure if I would go that route. What I would actually consider, since it's $80,000, is that you do a solo 401k instead. You can take out $50,000 or 50%, which is less. So in this case, you'll only be taking out $40,000, but you can do whatever you want with it. You can invest it, and you can even do a self loan, which you do not have the option to do so with a self-directed IRA.
Very good insight into that. Matt, I'm going to ask you the same question, but just change one thing. And that is, if you have $80,000 to invest, whether it's IRA or not, what would be the best way to put that to work in the greater Grand Rapids or West Michigan area?
I would call Charlie.
You're dealing with the $100 million deals, huh?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer, my answer to that question.
Yeah. Charlie, so forget the IRA aspect for a moment. Where would you put that to work?
Well, $80,000. So I guess the biggest thing I don't want to know is, what is your expertise in that area? Do you have something that you can fairly, leverage in that sense? So, for example, I had a client recently that is a contractor, and he's always running low, finding difficulty approving for financing because he's self-employed. But one of the things he does do that does significantly help him is he can go through a property. Once he's looked over for 15 minutes, he can offer on it and say, okay, I'm going to take it completely as is, but I want on land contract terms, and then we go that route. So before I asked that, I was saying, what other ways can you leverage that $80,000? Can you use that to basically partner with somebody else? Can you use that to get more education, and then figure out which way you can basically address one of those 3 deficiencies I talked? But right off the top, when I typically hear that $80,000, it makes me think more along the lines of a small multi. Right now, I think 4 units are the really big popular thing because it's the maximum unit count you can get and still get residential financing. One of the things I get, I talk to people and they're like, hey, I want to buy this duplex. Is that a 10 cap rate? I like to distinguish using a cap rate for a commercial where you have to use commercial financing. Reason for that being is because when you buy a commercial loan, it's very dependent on you on what type of financing you can get. So as Frederick said, the people who want financing that is more aggressive but don't need it are the ones that get it. So for example, I had a client on a deal that came back to me and said, hey, why did the bank come back at 70 LTV, 4.5%? I thought you said that you would normally get about this. I'm like, well, that's what I will get. That's not what you would get. So that's when I use cap rate. On the other side, when I use residential and I'm using residential financing, that's a 30-year fixed loan at a fixed rate. So I simply use cash flow. There's no need to use cap rate because you don't have the variable of financing changing every 5 years or whatnot. So immediately when I hear that, that's what jumps off is the residential fixed financing is the safest option as far as that. Even if the economy tanks, the value of that property were to go 50% or anything crazy like that, as long as you continue to make the payments on it, you will still basically keep that property. So that's would be my quick off the buckle recommendation, but ultimately I would want to know more about that situation before I really give a specific recommendation.
Okay, great. And I want to answer this next question here. Is the information today focused on Grand Rapids, Michigan? The answer is just a little bit. This is really meant to give us kind of a overall perspective on multifamily investing. It's not specific to Grand Rapids or Michigan. I think 98% of this information is going to apply no matter where you're investing. So don't think this is just Grand Rapids focused. I want to go back to that similar question, Fred, and ask you that question about $80,000 in a different way. And that is when an investor comes to you and says, hey, I want to invest in multifamily. I've got a certain amount of money, whether it's $20,000, $80,000, $200,000 or more. What do you take them through to determine what type of loan they're going to be able to acquire?
Part of it is experience. So, no lender wants to be first, and no lender wants to be in charge of your learning curve, right? So we look at experience, and we look at liquidity. Credits in there a little bit, but not really a huge driving factor. So we take a look at an overall picture, and then we kind of can back into it with the capital that you have to invest. I would like to say, I don't know. Oh, he did say it's from Grand Rapids. That 80,000. RPOA has breakfasts every Friday, and it's on their website. You show up, you pay. It's like $9 for breakfast or something like that. But there's all sorts of people in that room. There's people who will mentor you on what to do. They can partner with you. You can get 100 great ideas in one breakfast by attending those events, and it's all entrepreneurs just like that person is, looking to get into real estate or being super experienced in real estate. And it's amazing to me that even though a lot of them are competing against each other, how open and honest the discussions are, and it's there's no sense of lack or competing or you're going to take my house or anything like that. Just a bunch of really good people sharing a bunch of really good information. So that'd be my first step for that person with the 80,000. Yeah, and it goes to Charlie's. Get educated. Spend some of that money on education. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the breakfast meeting and the other get-togethers the RPOA has. And no matter where you are in the country, there's probably a professional organization or a meetup group or something where you can get together with other investors. And that type of networking is always invaluable. Diane, I want to go to you with the next question here. Okay. It's what is your process for increasing rent? A lot of properties are rented for much lower than the market rate with long-term tenants. How can we bring units up to market rate while retaining tenants? And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself in your own investing.
Right. Like I said, in our 20 unit, we purchased it at the end of December of 2019. And since COVID hit, we didn't raise rents. All of our tenants were really worried, oh, the rent's really going to go up. So we just sent them out a letter assuring them that we would not raise rents for a year. The next year, I guess in about October of 2020, October, November, we sent them all a letter and saying your rent is going to increase this amount. I think we did like 3 or 4%, and this will take place February 1st. So we did give them quite a bit of time to prepare in their budgets that it would be going up. As people move out there, we redo the units and make them a lot nicer than what they are now. You know, just add new flooring, you know, paint, new lighting, stainless steel appliances. And so when they move out, the rent goes up quite a bit to more market value. So kind of hope that more people will move out, but so far they haven't. So that's kind of our process. In the next couple of months, we'll be sending out another letter again saying that your rent will increase, you know, beginning February 1st, you know, another 3, 4, 5%. So I did have another tenant too call and ask for new flooring because her carpet was old. And so I explained to her, well, that's really quite an upgrade. So because of that, on this date, your rent will go up this much. And she said, wow, that seems like a lot. And I said, well, that's, you know, quite an expensive upgrade to get new flooring because she wanted the nice vinyl plank. And she said, how about if we do this much this day and this much, you know, in 2 or 3 months? And I said, okay, we can work with that. So that's another thing that, you know, we're going to be doing as well.
So have you acquired any properties in your portfolio that had a legacy tenant in there, someone who was already in the property and paying a very, very low rent compared to market? Have you experienced that where you brought them up more dramatically than that 3 or 4% that you just mentioned?
We try not to do that, just to, you know, be fair to the tenant. It's hard, you know, when you have to come up with an extra $50 to $75 a month. So therefore, some of our properties are still probably at a lower rate than they should be, but we're over the years gradually trying to increase that. So just more every year. Some of them we do maybe 10%, 8 to 10%. We have one in particular that we've been doing that with. So it just takes time to do that. So, and we really do want to keep her as a tenant. She's been a great tenant. She takes care of the property. So
Brian, I'd just like to add something to the rent increase conversation, which is I think sometimes people get so focused on, well, we're going to raise this rent to market and maybe that's, you know, $45 higher than what it currently is. And what gets lost in the conversation is there's a cost to turning a unit, right? Whether it's paint, cleaning, new appliances, new flooring, whatever it may be. And so yeah, part of the math equation has to be, well, what is that cost and what is the return on our investment? So if I have a good tenant and they're paying, you know, regularly, they have, and maybe they're $25, $50 below market, but it's going to cost me $1,000 to turn that unit. Well, what's the ROI on that? I think also you should think about, like, if you're talking to someone like Fred and you're doing a refinance, then it makes sense to have a, you know, show a higher rent roll and a higher income because it's going to help your proceeds, certainly. But if you're operating a property long term, you know, there's some having a tenant that you know is good, that's maybe $25 below market versus having a tenant that you don't know about is, to me, I'd rather have the tenant that I know about than the extra $25 a month. The other thing that we found in our personal portfolio as we raised rents over the last year or two, really, I guess now, is that tenants say, oh my gosh, that's crazy, we'll never pay that. And then they go out and look at what's available on the market and they come back and say, where do we sign? So I think the demand and the occupancy in Grand Rapids is making it specifically tough for tenants to have other options. And if they haven't shopped for a while, they may have sticker shock initially, but once they shop, I think they realize that that's the market now.
Yep, I totally agree. Very good point. I would rather have a tenant that I know is good and pays the rent than, have a turnover time, have to do repairs, that kind of thing, and not know who the next tenant will be. So I totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah, good. Great advice there from both of you. And this feeds into one of the next questions I have, and we can kind of go across the board here to each of you to answer this. But ways to increase net operating income. Any recommendations you have for our viewers today on how they can increase their net operating income? Something you may have tried recently or not too long ago in your own portfolio. And Charlie, why don't we start with you?
I think the biggest one by far is ratio utility billing system or some type of bill back to the tenants. That by far I think is the biggest bad because one, it makes the tenants more responsible as far as what they're actually spending, so they're not as going out crazy with spending utilities. And then from there, I've seen a number of things. Obviously, weighing in, like if it cost me $7,000 to do a renovation, I like to be at least a double digit, but preferably more. I like to have a 3-year return. So if I'm going to spend $7,000 on a renovation, I want to get that $7,000 back in rental increases in 3 years or less.
Okay.
So that's another metric I use as far as doing renovations to get. And then there's also, laundry, internet, which I know some people that kind of discontinue with. And then also basically do small value adds like adding storage. I actually invest in self-storage too as well. So I found adding parking, covered parking, storage, or even like using a basement, for example, that's completely empty, adding 5x10s and charging them $60 a month. That I found is very helpful. And actually one of the benefits I found from that too as well is that we set them up on a separate storage lease from that. So what I find is if they don't pay that lease, we lock them out. And then now I also know that there's a good chance they're going to be late on their rent for their apartment too as well. And I can leverage, I don't have to take you to court and auction your stuff out. So I'm going to get rid of this in the meantime while you're trying to pay me to, So those are kind of the biggest things. But I would say really the two biggest ones, ratio utility billing and then basically upgrades, but factoring that return on upgrade.
And ratio utility billing, also called RUBS, is basically if your tenant isn't paying their own utility bills, you can bill them separately for that, as opposed to just paying it out of pocket yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you can either sub-meter, and there are some companies that will actually come out and do a sub-meter, and then they charge you a bill fee, you pass that to the tenant. Or the one that's getting more common right now is if it's difficult to separate is that, let's say you have 1,000 square foot duplex, one tenant is 60% of that square footage or 600 square feet. You'll bill back 60% of that bill over and then 40% of another. Now, for those that invest out of market, each state has their own guidelines. So I have quite a few units in Texas, for example. Texas actually does have a limitation of how much you can ratio utility bill back, which is 97%. So you do want to make sure that you're within your local guidelines too as well.
Great advice. Fred, how, I apologize because I don't know if you actually own any rental property. So feel free to pass on this question if you want. But maybe your clients, how are you seeing people raise rent and net operating income?
Not a good question for me, Brian.
Okay.
I just add up their costs.
All right, fair enough. Diane, how about you?
I agree with the utility one. We just started doing that this year with some of our tenants with the water bill, which we have always paid, in our more than like duplexes, triplexes. So, yep. So that's what we do.
Getting tenants to pay their own utilities.
Correct.
Even though that it may not be metered separately. And, there's that. So let me follow up on that with you, Diane, because there's the two schools of thought. One is, we'll just increase the rent to cover that, versus, we'll charge market rent and we'll charge separately for utilities. Have you had to wrestle with those two schools of thought yourself?
We did not. We just chose to go the utility route. Sometimes people, if you raise their rent too much, they're going to say, whoa, but if you just kind of do the utility, they just kind of let that slide.
So, so they let it slide. Have you had any pushback from tenants whatsoever saying, well, no, I don't want to pay this separate utility bill?
No, we have not.
Good. Yeah, good to know. Matt, what about you? How are you raising your net operating income?
I think it's twofold, right? You've got the income side and you've got the expense side, and both are equally important. So on the income side, whether it's a non-refundable pet deposit for pets, or maybe it's an additional, $10, $15, $25 monthly charge for pets. Another interesting one that I've seen lately that's in nicer properties, larger, nicer properties, is valet trash service. So it's $25 a month. All you do is put your trash outside your door between 6 and 8 o'clock, and there's a valet trash person that walks around and picks up trash. And there's one property actually that made it mandatory for all of the tenants to do it. So, across a couple hundred units, $25 a month adds up over the course of time. And then on the expense side, I personally would, when we're looking at our P&Ls, for each property every year, looking at things like insurance or landscaping, bidding out that stuff on a yearly basis to make sure that you're, not just, oh, Joe's always done it, so I'm going to use Joe, but maybe Joe charges twice as much as what the market rate is now. So I think going line by line on the expense side, there's potentially a lot of savings there. If you're really nitpicky about it.
Oh, great advice. So let's go to some of the questions here from our audience today. One at the very top here says, what is the best education sources? So if someone out there is just learning or just starting to get into multifamily investing, where would you suggest they start? And Diane, we'll go to you first.
Well, first of all, I would suggest RPOA. They have a lot of classes. Brian, you also have a finance class for multi-units, is that correct?
Yeah, I do a class for the RPOA called Advanced Financial Analysis for Commercial Properties, and it's available online. So it's even though it's through the RPOA, you don't have to be local. You can watch it from anywhere in the world. So you can access a lot of the RPOA's classes through the RPOAonline.org. But thank you for that plug.
Steve and I also went to an Anthony Chara conference. And there's also somebody else, Rod Cleef, but definitely get some education through some of those places. Talk to other people and find out what they have done.
Yeah, there's a lot of, Anthony Chara has spoken at our annual conference. Rod Cleef does a great job training. There's a lot of people out there providing training in multifamily. So Fred, any suggestions from you, either for the beginner or intermediate investor, where they could get some education?
Nothing outside of what Diane mentioned, other than that breakfast again. Will get you started on a path to find out additional resources for you.
Yeah, start talking to people who are actually doing it, networking in person or virtually, like we're doing right now on Remo. Yep. Charlie, what about you? Where would you direct people to find additional education?
Well, I mean, it goes back to, how do you learn the best? Like for me, for a number of years, I worked a W-2 job where I drove 60, 70,000 miles a year. And I was in the car for, 20, 30 hours. So I listened to probably 40 hours of podcasts. Brian, your podcast, every single podcast for about 3 years, I've heard every single one. So that's one thing for sure. Networking is the other thing, but I want to drop something kind of outside the box, and hopefully everybody here can appreciate the candidness. Because
move closer to your computer as you do it, because
hopefully everybody can appreciate the candidness, because I give this advice to a number of people. But a while back, I had a mentor of mine that he's a centimillionaire, very, very valuable time. And I was asking him questions, and he was getting back to me pretty quickly. And then one day he flat out says to me, Charles, I need you to value my time better. I understand I'm a resource for you. Your dad and I are friends. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you got to realize that everybody's looking for a mentoring scheme. Everybody's looking to grow. Everybody's calling our people. And so I was calling him to be like, hey, where can I look up the Grand Rapids rental cert? Things that, I was seeing, like, I looked on Google, I couldn't find it. And he flat out told me, Charles, you need to get better at using Google, or you need to get better at recognizing how much time my time is worth. So your time, let's just say, is worth $30 an hour. Yeah, you can ask me and save 15 minutes of your time and save, $5, $10 of your time. But you also got to realize that my time is worth thousands of dollars an hour. So if you use 5 minutes of my time, it probably cost me $500. So one of the things I want to point to people on this podcast is networking is very, very important. While respecting people's time is ultra important. If you have somebody that can answer all your questions, that's great. But be respectful that the reason they got to the point in time where they can answer all your questions is because their time is very valuable. So, that would see the networking. That's one thing, but always remember that. Like if I'm calling Matt Jones, I'm probably not going to call him to ask how to get rid of a tenant that has an ugly cat. But if I want to ask him how to turn a property from $1 million to $2 million, that's the call I'm going to call him, because I don't want to call him for all my problems, because then he's never going to pick up the phone. Or at least maybe he'll say he would. But I know I personally, if you call me for all your problems, I'm just going to politely ignore you. And that's just being as candid as possible.
Yeah, great advice, especially on being efficient with your mentor's time and valuing it appropriately. Matt, I want to ask you the same question, and I want to make sure that you mention the Collier's market reports that you guys put out, because they're fantastic.
Yeah, I think the difference now versus 10, 15, 20 years ago is just the proliferation of podcasts and the sheer amount of information and data that's available. I think, whether it's multifamily investing or anything really, you can really teach yourself a lot better than you could have through YouTube videos or podcasts or reading. The only thing that I would say on the podcast front or YouTube or whatever is just make sure that you are doing a little bit of background search on who's giving the advice, because I've seen a couple lately where people are out there giving advice, but I don't know are qualified to be giving advice. And so certainly listen, but maybe do a little research on who you're listening to. I think it's a competitor, so forgive the plug, but Walker and Dunlap actually has a really great weekly webcast that's now a podcast that they interview some really great people, and I listen to that weekly. I think an off-the-wall recommendation is become a member of the Urban Land Institute. I think it's like a couple $100 a year. But they have some really great classes and certifications that you can take on financial modeling, development, any kind of course that you want to take online. You can do a pretty deep dive, and it's just a great organization. There's a local chapter here in Grand Rapids as well as Michigan too. So
awesome. Thanks for that advice. Let's go to the next question here. And just a quick reminder, ask your questions in the Q&A box and vote on the ones you want to make sure get answered. What are some of the resources for a nonprofit shared housing program that would be looking for grants/investors for multifamily units in Flint and Detroit? That is a very specific question. Is anyone here up for answering that?
Collier's has an internal property, or I forget what their official title is, incentives group. And their sole job is to basically guide investors through the process of all the different incentives that are out there on a state, national level. And so I would recommend calling George Larimore at Collier's.
George, can you spell his name so someone, whoever asked this question, can Google it?
George with a G, and Larimore is Larimore.
All right, very good. Yeah, Google George Larimore Colliers, and he should be able to help you. Anybody else have value they can add to this question?
I can't answer this specifically, but just to give context on this, we just had to get the lead out. That program actually is very quick. I've dealt with in the past, but so investors are aware of when you're dealing with grants, you're dealing with very, very lengthy processes, significant hold times, and oftentimes what you're buying is a property all cash, waiting for the grant, letting it sit there for years. So you have to have significant capital oftentimes to work with it. But to Matt's point too as well, expertise is very, very important. I apply this all the time, but if somebody is familiar with the grants and the city's familiar with that person, that will save you a bunch of time and money. Like, you know, whenever I deal with the engineer when I'm doing site plans and I'm talking with a city inspector or a city official, I ask them, who do you like to work with? If you have a great relationship with them, I guarantee you that's going to help your side of the deal. So, yeah, call that guy, like you said, Greg Larimore. I think that's a great resource. But off the cuff, I would not try going into a grant without on your own. I definitely wouldn't bootstrap on your own. I definitely would hire somebody or bring somebody in if you're doing a grant, especially if it's larger.
Yeah, great advice. All right, next question here is, do you find that tenants are more interested in units that have utilities included? And Diane, let's go back to you for this question. Are tenants more interested in renting a unit where the utilities are included, or does it make any difference at all?
We haven't found that it made any difference at all. For our 20 unit, the only thing they have to pay there is electricity. We cover the water, trash, and gas, since we have boiler heat there. So for us, we haven't really noticed any difference.
Charlie, what about you?
I'm sure they would, but if they complain about it and the time it takes us to respond, we've already rented it out. So one of the things I always tell people is you have to know, in negotiations, you have to know who has more leverage in that scenario. It's always who's more willing to walk away. And I can tell you right now, landlords and leasing have all the leverage. So the faster a tenant recognizes that, the faster they're going to find a place they want to rent. But they might, we just don't know because we're filling the unit so fast at this point in time.
Yeah, good point. Matt, any additional input on that?
No, I think there's so much supply and demand imbalance right now that the tenants kind of just have to take whatever they can get. I actually heard on the supply and demand, and maybe this person's on here, but I heard one of my clients was telling me this happened in Grand Rapids. They had an open house for one, apartment unit, and then they held like an auction to see how, who would bid the highest on a monthly basis to live in the unit. And it went for much higher than what they had sort of anticipated. So I don't think that's going to become the norm, but I thought it was interesting and a great example of how crazy the demand is right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a landlord's market as opposed to a renter's market at the moment. What sources are out there for finding multifamily housing units that are for sale? MLS, knock on doors. Charlie, what do you recommend? If someone wants to find out what's for sale in the multifamily world, where should they look?
All good resources. A lot of it goes back to, obviously leveraging. If you have the time, then maybe you want to learn how to find the deals yourself by doing direct marketing. If you don't, maybe you want to find somebody that does, but then you're paying them a fee to do so. One of the biggest things I found is that, going back even 5 years, is I used to spend about $3,000 to $4,000 in marketing properties off market. But now I don't even spend any money. I might do a few calls, but primarily I just focus on networking influences. And one of the ways I found to create even better networks is that most of the deals, so I have a wholesaler or a broker that brings me a deal. A lot of times I actually will basically give them a bigger cut on the deal, even if I bring the buyer, just simply because it's easier for me to have all these people bringing me deals than spending money. So if a wholesaler, I just had to deal with a wholesaler. You wanted to make $50,000 on the deal as a multifamily, it's a decent size, and I'm making $20,000 on it, but I was fine with it. He bought it to me. My buyers bought it in 10 minutes, and simply he's going to bring me all those deals every single time going forward. The other thing I want to highlight is that in this market, you have to be very creative. So if you're hearing on a podcast, you also have to keep in mind that there's a good chance 100,000 people might be trying that exact same method. And so I'll give you an example. One of the approaches I use, and there's probably going to be 100 people trying this now that I said it, but we used to use a lot of national data for marketing leads, but then we cross-reference with local data. So my local expertise knows that Grand Rapids is one of the few markets in the country that offer actually rental certs to be publicly displayed, as well as when they're expiring. And so I found personally that owners that are coming due on their expiring rental cert within 6 to 9 months tend to have more motivation to sell than owners that don't, because simply for the fact that they know they have repairs coming up to get that expired rental cert process. So I took a local report. I leveraged my local expertise, but then I cross-referenced it and stacked it against the national reports I've used. So by combining the two and seeing who were on both lists, I found essentially that, wow, these people are quality. So when I was calling that list, the close ratio has gone down significantly. So that's kind of why I'm disclosing it now. But my close ratio was almost 80% at one point on these leads actually selling. So you want to reference, and I can't see it over time, knowledge, and capital. You really got to leverage where you have the most stuff. You have a lot of time, then leverage that time until your time becomes so valuable that you can leverage other people's capital or something along those lines. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what I would recommend.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Diane, what's your go-to resources for finding units for sale?
We do some marketing, send letters. Steve does a lot of driving around, just to see where the units are, thinking maybe we'll do that. He does some phone calls, contacts people. We've contacted the people that own the 12 unit, I think, next door to see if maybe they're interested in selling. We also have a realtor friend, actually several, that just look out for good deals for us. And that's actually how we bought the one that we bought, was through a realtor friend.
Okay. And what kind of yield are you getting on the driving and the calling and the direct communications?
We get some phone calls, but people right now just want top dollar. How much you're going to pay for it. So
owners are aware that they're sitting on a gold mine at the moment.
Yes, they are. They definitely are. So,
Matt, going to you, how would people find out? Same question to you, really. What is the go-to resource for finding out what's available on the market?
I don't think that there is one go-to resource. I think you have to have your eggs in a lot of different baskets, because you just never know where a deal is going to come from. So relationships are imperative. To Charlie's point, leveraging technology. But you never know what conversation is going to lead to a deal. I think, in our world, in the world that I sort of play in, we don't put anything on the MLS ever. It's all direct deals. And so developing relationships with, brokers who are doing deals in the markets that you want to be in is critical, certainly. And, getting on their list. In some cases, we may have someone that brings us an opportunity, and I might get one or two, swings at that with the client. And so I'm going to call the person that I know is going to walk in. They're not going to nickel and dime. They're going to pay what they need to pay, and they're going to close the transaction. And so that takes a little bit of time to build up that rapport and that trust. But I think the short answer is there is no one way. And I think if you're relying on one way, you're probably not going to get a lot of deals done. So diversify.
So when people advise, well, get to know the brokers and take them out to lunch and be on their list so you get contacted when they have something, you're one of those brokers they're referring to. Is that would that be correct? I
suppose. Yeah, I mean, we do all direct marketing. You're not, unless you're kind of in the know, you're probably not seeing most of the deals that we're putting out. And I'll do around $200 million of transaction velocity this year. So yeah, you have to figure out, who to talk to, and that's not always easy. But I think if you can look on, the LoopNets or the CoStars or the wherever, and just say, okay, what brokers are actually doing transactions, and introduce yourself. To Charlie's earlier point, be respectful of, time, but it doesn't hurt to introduce and, get on an email list or just look at deals. And I think that gives you a better perspective of what's actually available, so that when you do find the one that you like, you're ready to jump. And that's the other thing now is you can't be wishy-washy, because there's 10 to 100 other people that also want to buy that deal. So if you find the one, don't think about it overnight.
You have to move quickly, huh?
Yeah.
Fred, I want to change this question slightly for you, because you're on the loan side, you're on the lender side,
Right.
And you're a broker, so you have access to a lot of different products when it comes to lending on this. What types of resources are out there for, like, say, an investor who's got $20,000 down payment, and up to an investor who might have $1 million or more down payment? Like, how do you help your clients find the best type of loan?
It's a lot of data collection, and what I love about this business is every transaction's different, right? So if they're light on their down payment, but they have a bunch of experience, then we can tailor the loan to that individual. If they're not very liquid, but they have a lot of equity in their properties, we can pull it for that. So the biggest thing, sometimes the best thing that could happen to you is you got turned down for a loan, because it means a bunch of people who have a bunch of time and experience in the industry are looking at it going, we're not interested. And if there's a surplus of capital in the marketplace and they need assets to deploy that capital onto, and they're not funding your deal, it's probably because it's not a good deal, right? So I guess one of the resources would be, we really don't like pre-quals. Can I get pre-qualled for a multifamily, because we don't know if it's a 5-unit or a 50-unit, right? But sitting down, having a discussion, and getting just a holistic approach to, this is who I am, this is what I'm trying to do. We sit down and talk to people, and we'll tell them, well, instead of taking your 20,000 and buying 20 units, why don't you look at buying this nice little fix and flip, right? And start off with a single family and do a couple of those, and then maybe do, try one on a mixed use, or, I almost said 5-unit. Don't buy a 5-unit. That's another resource for you. But 6 units are fine. So just, sit down, have a conversation, be open, honest. Let the lender know the dirty laundry, because we're going to find it anyways, and then we'll set you up on a path to get your first property, or your 10th property, or your 100th property.
Now, are you a one-stop shop for all types of investors, like fix and flippers, rehabbers, as well as commercial loans, or what exactly is your niche?
I'd say the niche would be multifamily rehab. I advertise that all over the country. Fix and flips as well, fix and holds. So probably up to 20 units, sometimes 40 units, but up to 20 units, mixed use, multifamily rehab. And then once it's rehab, then we can take them out with, which this is unheard of too, 30-year fixed pricing on that. No arms, no balloons, no adjustments, 30-year fixed.
All right, fantastic, thanks. So we've mentioned cap rates a number of times, and I see a question here. What is a cap rate? And Charlie, you did touch on this briefly. Matt, I'm wondering if you want to tackle this, and explain in your words what a cap rate is.
It is simply the NOI divided by the purchase price. So if you're buying $1 million property and there's a $100,000 NOI, that is a 10 cap. The one thing that I will say about cap rates is that they are infinitely subjective. And so, you know, my 7 cap might be Brian's 5 cap and Charlie's 8 cap and Diane's, you know, 2 cap, depending on how you run the property, right? And so I think that some people will say, oh, I'm looking for an 8 cap. Well, that's great, but that 8 cap might mean different things to different people. And so as a great example, I sold a property earlier this year that on the trailing incomes, I think it traded at like a 4 cap, right? But the rents were way below market. There were some expense things that were kind of out of whack. And so while they're buying, most people would say, well, I would never buy a 4 cap. Well, they bought this at a 4 cap trailing, but are going to stabilize it at probably a 7 or an 8 cap. And so I think you always need to do a little deeper dive into what that sort of advertised cap rate really means and verify that, you know, I see a lot of brokers advertising properties and they say it's an 8 cap, but they don't include, you know, taxes or management, or they just kind of leave out some of the things on the expense side. So it's a higher cap rate. The other thing in Michigan that you need to be, you know, very conscious of is the property taxes on capping. And so if someone's owned a property for 20 years and the taxes are, you know, the taxable value has been capped, how much it can go up, it's not uncommon for taxes to double or triple or go up even higher depending on how long someone's owned that property. So make sure that you're kind of incorporating that into your underwriting and not getting hit with a, you know, 3x tax bill when it gets reassessed that, you know, you thought was a 7 cap and now it's a 3 cap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple follow-up comments on what you just said. So yeah, I found in Michigan, one of the biggest mistakes investors make is not realizing the property taxes will become uncapped when the property transfers, and the property taxes that the previous owner was paying are very likely not what you're going to be paying when you buy that property. And you need to know what that's going to be. I also want to plug my class, my advanced financial analysis class that is available online through the RPOA. We go into quite a bit of detail on cap rate and calculating, you know, what the value of a property should be based on net operating income and cap rate. And it is a mathematical thing. And the more you understand the math behind commercial real estate investing, the more money you can make in commercial real estate investing, including multifamily. Anybody else want to add value to that question regarding cap rate? All right. When reconstruction is necessary on a property and city permits are required, how do you find an architect to prepare the necessary drawings? Has anyone gone through this process working with an architect and just, I mean, do you just pick up the phone or do you get recommendations? How would you guys go about that? Who wants to take this one?
I'll be candid. I don't want to be the rude panel person on this, but I'll be very candid. Architects' times are a lot of money. And I'm going to tell you from personal experience, if you call architect with like, hey, I was thinking about doing this, or I'm just trying to pick their brain really quickly or take you out for lunch, they're probably not going to pick up the phone very much after that. You have to have a very, very specific plan. And the other thing about it too as well is that you got to come to architect and know exactly what you want. So even if it's a rough sketch and it says, hey, I want to use this, I've already looked into it. But one of the things I can really say is that when you talk to an architect or anybody that's a professional in this industry, if you can self-qualify yourself by showing them what you know as far as what they do, that will help significantly. So if you start telling them, I've already talked to the city, I know I have 50% of green space I have to work with, I know I can go 3 floors, and they know you've done some of that, they're going to take the cost significantly more experience than if you're calling them and having them be the sole resource for that. But it really depends, but I find a lot of people think that you need an architect when really what they just need is a general building construction management team that will probably have an in-house person to do that as well. So that would be my first thing to do, is kind of touch base on that. Know your building costs are there, and then you can work with an architect from there to go with that. Or also, it also helps to have an architect that's worked with the building construction manager, because if they have a great working relationship, that will significantly increase the efficiency on the project as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, Charlie, I know you are you can do a lot of that stuff yourself, like the things you just mentioned, being very specific, knowing what you need. You know, someone like me, I'm usually not as clear on what I might need from that architectural standpoint. So I would want to find a good architect who's got a good relationship with the city and knows how to work through that permitting process. And I've done that in the past, especially in a historical district where it's been invaluable. Without that, the right person in place, we would just get bogged down in all kinds of bureaucratic mess. So it is important to, in some cases, to have a really good architect who can help prepare the drawings and not just know how to prepare them, but how to work with the city or the municipality to get them through. Anybody else want to add to that? How do you think the eviction moratorium will affect the multifamily investment space? Matt, why don't we take that? Why don't you take that one?
This is a trap question because I could go on for a long time about it. I think, try and remain apolitical here. I don't think it certainly has impacted, as I said earlier, certain niches and maybe more of the workforce housing than the national average housing. The fact that it got extended doesn't make a ton of sense to me, and obviously is being legally challenged. I think the misconception sometimes with that is that it's just a blanket, you can't evict for any reason. And to be clear, it is only for very specific terms relating to income and COVID. And so, if someone's selling drugs at your property or causing property damage or things like that, you can still evict them. That it's not a, you can't get rid of them for no reason at all. But there was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was last week, kind of citing specific cases and horror stories that I think, most property owners are very smart people and are figuring out ways to Diane's earlier point. I think, they're helping people fill out the paperwork to get the rental assistance or pointing them in the right direction to help them if they are having issues. And I think landlords have been, unfairly burdened in all of this to kind of provide free housing. Our property taxes haven't stopped, our maintenance hasn't stopped, those bills keep coming, and having rent come in to pay for those things is very important. I think the national average for every dollar that of rent that a landlord receives, the national average is that they keep 7 to 8 cents of that, just national average, right? And so there's a misconception out there that landlords are sitting around just, in their piles of money. And that's really not the case. By and large, a landlord in this country is a small mom and pop who owns, 1 to 10 or 20 units. That's who's a housing provider. And we have a housing shortage in this country that's pretty significant. And so I don't think unfairly burdening landlords with, paying for this stuff is good. Oh, I could talk for a long time on this, so I'll cut myself off.
Is it a short-term pain, or do you see it extending to be a longer-term pain that will affect the asset class as a whole going forward?
I think depending on how long this goes, and even if it gets lifted, the backlog is so long, it might still take 3 to 6 to 9 months to actually effectuate an eviction because of what the backlog I see is coming. But I also think a lot of tenants can pay their rent and are just choosing not to because there's not really any teeth to it, right? So some of those, potential evictions, people will say, oh, never mind, here's the money, now that they can be evicted. I think that there will be people that absolutely suffer and are suffering, and maybe you lose properties because of it. Because if you've got a duplex, for instance, and you're living in one side and your tenant upstairs is not paying, and you lost your job, and you still have property taxes and maintenance and insurance and all those things, I mean, at some point the bucket runs dry.
Fred, I want to ask you from a lending perspective, is the eviction moratorium having any effect in the lending space?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I haven't seen a distressed property come across my desk in 6 months. Like I haven't had a landlord saying, I'm behind on, well, I take that back, I have one. But his problem started pre-COVID anyhow. But I don't get calls for it. I don't get calls for, hey, we're 3 payments behind. We need a hard money loan just based upon the asset. I'm not seeing the distressed borrowers or sponsors at all. At all.
Is anybody on this panel seeing that distress? I mean, is there a backup of distressed properties that are going to flood the market and bring down prices of the asset class as a whole?
I don't think there's so much capital. There's 100 buyers willing to pay premium pricing for that distressed asset, and those are fewer and far between. I've seen in the 100 properties that we've underwritten plus or minus this year, maybe less than 5 had delinquency issues, and they were D assets in kind of rough locations. So yeah, to Fred's point, I don't think that there is a ton of distress, and we sold a few of those, and we sold them at crazy prices because people just bid it up. So it's not impacting pricing.
There was a very short period at the beginning of COVID when there was a shutdown for about 2 to 3 months, where I actually had $6 million of deals fall apart in 2 months. So but actually all those deals within a year did sell, and they all actually sold at a higher price. So when we talk about opportunity, everybody was running away. That would have been a good time for people to buy, because I had a number of deals where people retraded and then they got a better rate. And I know one of them actually was with Colliers actually. And so that was an opportunity there, but people got scared obviously because they didn't know what was going to happen. That uncertainty made people. But now that we've been seasoned to know what's going to happen, which I think it's safe to say we know there's going to be government bailout and significant government bailout. I think the fear that's going away.
Right. Fred, you said something that has that actually I was scratching my head as well, but people are wondering why you're against 5 units, not against 6 units.
Let me clean that up for you. There's something called a door value, and it's a value that a minimum value per door, right? And that's usually $50,000, or the property has to be worth at least $250,000. But when you get these 5 units, there's like a couple in Battle Creek I couldn't get done. A few in Grand Rapids I couldn't get done just because the door value wasn't either there or the property as a whole value wasn't there. But if it was a 4 unit, it'd be a done deal, easy peasy, treated as residential. So one customer of mine actually converted a 5 unit to a 4 unit, and we were able to get him financing. But it's just such the value. The step from 4 unit to 5 unit goes from residential to commercial. It goes from a consumer loan to a business loan or a corporate loan, and it's just the low suppressed values on those assets.
So I'm trying to understand this because definitely there's that division between the residential lending and then the commercial lending, and that cutoff point is 4 to 5 doors. So if you're up to 4 doors, you're residential. If you're 5 doors or more, you're commercial, and that's the type of loan you're going to get. When you talk about door value, are you saying that a 5 unit just may not be worth enough to qualify for any particular type of commercial product that's out there?
Well, so let's say you have a 5 unit and you're trying to buy it for $200,000, right? Well, if you take that 200,000 divided by 5, it's $40,000 per door is what you're paying. But there's a minimum of $50,000 per door. So it falls in a weird spot where they're not worth enough on one program. Where if it was a 6-unit, it'd be worth, the $250,000. So it's the challenge more with door value.
So if you have a 5, because I have a 5-unit.
Yeah.
And, if my door value is over 50,000, am I okay? Or
yeah, you're fine.
Still be concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to make sure your door value is at least 50,000 or more to be able to get the loan products that you're talking about.
Right. But if it was a 4-unit, it'd be easy. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Because then it's residential and it doesn't matter.
And they don't care about door values. So. And usually a 6-unit is going to be worth more than 250,000, so you're still okay there. So it's just it's a balance act. They're just weird white elephant type properties when it comes to financing.
I was never aware of that, but that's good that you cleared that up. Thank you. Yeah. So this person would like to start with a 4 to 6 unit. This is right on topic with what we were just talking about. Do you suggest owner occupied? Who wants to take this? Diane, what would you say? Would you suggest if this person were going to buy a 4 to 6 unit that they live in one of the units?
I would think if they were single or, just them and the wife, depending on how big it is. It also, I think, would depend on if they want tenants knocking on their door all the time. So, what kind of tenant relationship do you want? So...
Yeah. Are you going to be able to treat it as a business, or is it going to be one big dysfunctional family?
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment on that, Brian.
Yes, please.
A 4-unit, it can be owner occupied, and you can get conventional financing, Fannie Freddie financing on that with a nice low interest rate, a 30-year fixed. On a 5-unit, you flip over, it becomes a commercial loan, and you're not allowed to live there. Now, I'm not saying
so it's got to be 1 to 4 units if you're going to actually house hack and live in one of the units.
Yeah.
But 5 units or more, you can't live in the property.
Right. Yep. Now, if it's mixed use, you can have the space below, right? But a commercial lender never wants to have to deal with consumer foreclosure laws, right? And if you live there, then it becomes an owner occupied, and it muddles it up. So. You'll sign covenants saying I'm not going to live there. What happens after that? Who knows? But yeah, that's the challenge.
Okay, good to know. You just gave me 2 things I did not know today, so that's awesome. But I do think that house hacking and living, getting a 1 to 4 unit or 2 to 4 unit and living in one of the units is one of the best ways to get started investing in real estate. I really think that's a smart move, as long as you still treat it like a business. Next question here: for self-managed multifamily investment, cap rate is higher. What would be a good number for that? Rent is up. Do you see cost going way up soon? Trying to wrap my head around that question. For self-managed multifamily investment, cap rate is higher. What would be a good? If you're, I wonder if the premise is if you're self-managing, your cap rate's going to be higher because you're not paying for the management fee for starters. What would be a good number for that? Rent is up. Do you see costs? Does anyone want to help me with this question?
When we underwrite properties, even if you're self-managing, people tend to say, oh, I'm going to manage this myself so I can remove the management line item on the expense side, and it makes it look like a better deal. But your time is valuable, and so you're going to put time and effort into managing that property. And so even if you're doing it yourself, I always underwrite a management, whatever the market rate management fee is, as a backstop to A, compensate yourself for your time, and B, what happens if you fall and break a hip and you can't manage it anymore and you have to hire a property manager, third party to manage it. So that way you kind of have that built-in expense. So I don't like seeing P&Ls where people say, oh, well, I'm going to manage it myself, so we can just take that out. Well, there is a time and effort, which translates to some amount of money associated with that.
Okay. We put a number in there even on self-managed, because if we take the property back, we're not going to self-manage it. So we put a number on there when we do our profitability analysis.
What are you typically putting on there for property management?
We go back to, I'll call Matt and say, how much is it? Call a local broker, say what's the management fees, and we take a local number on that.
Yeah, and if you're selling and you're not including your management fee on the pro forma or on the numbers, well, the buyer's very likely, if they're sophisticated enough, gonna put that number in there for themselves.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Charlie, this next question is for you here. You said that you would be willing to pay more for an asset here in West Michigan than a different market. Is the 70% ARV still in play for these homes, or are you paying more? And you're muted right now, Charlie.
So kind of give clarification for that, like Dallas-Fort Wayne, for example, I have investments there. I would pay a lower cap rate in that market because, one, it's more compressed, and that one has even better metrics than Grand Rapids. But for example, right now I'm seeing a lot of people chasing cap rates. I want to get that TAC 10 cap, and so they'll go to Geil, Michigan to get that. And it's like, well, Geil, Michigan has a very low population. It's not many employers. If there's a slowdown in the economy, there's a good chance people will move to find jobs, which would be going to a place like Grand Rapids. So that's kind of highlighting why that's like, I believe that Grand Rapids cap rate for the market cap rate will compress yet again. So that's why I'm fine with overpaying a little bit. So if I do the market cap rate 6.5, I might be willing to pay a 6.25 because I feel it's going to get there very quickly. And to be honest, I can't tell you how many deals I passed on where I'm like, oh, that's a little overpaid. And then within 6 months, I'm like, oh my goodness, why didn't I buy that deal? Now my client's refinancing all their cash out a year later. And I'm sure Matt and Frederick can both attest to. So I definitely have seen a lot of that. Now, as far as the 70% ERV, that is going to be very, very difficult to get unless you're direct marketing. Because one, I even run in this where if I were to get a deal that good, because I am a licensed real estate salesperson in Michigan, I do have fiduciary capacity to disclose what I believe is a reasonable market value. So I have some fiduciary capacity to the client, regardless of whether they actually are officially my client. So that's one thing. But more than likely, like if I do a wholesaler, if they get it 70% below market, they're probably going to mark it up to the point where their fee is, 20%, and then they're marking up to only 10% below that. So it's going to be very difficult to get that. On the commercial side, if you're looking at 15, 20, 30 units, that will only happen if it's a highly distressed property. Because, simply, if somebody's got to the point where they bought $1 million or $2 million property, they probably got there because they are somewhat of a decent real estate investor in most cases, unless it was acquired through a probate or through a will. So I would say that in general, that 70% ERV, I really try not to follow on that 70% rule. I just really look at it as a factor of what's my cash on cash return and what is my return on time. So if I can get a property where I can get 100% return in 2 years, but the first 16 months of that I'm making almost nothing, then that might be worth it for me. If I'm looking at a stabilized property where I can cash flow double-digit cash and cash return, but I don't have upside where I can only maybe improve that to 12%, I got to factor in those things. So it's really a case by case, but at 70% ERV, that's a guru number. I feel like that's a unicorn. It doesn't happen very often. And one more thing I will highlight is that, yes, I might get deals like this every once in a while, but if you're calling me for the very first time and you're saying, hey, I got $1 million in the bank and whatnot, that's not going to get you that deal from me. I'm going to take it to my clients that I've had past relationships. And so Matt talked about building a rapport with brokers. Simply buying stuff from brokers is the best way to build rapport. If I have somebody to buy stuff at a 6.5, 7 cap, which is market, and I know they're going to close, later on when I get a 9 or 10 cap, I'm probably going to go to that same guy because I have rapport with them. I know they're going to close. If they close on a 6.5 cap, I know they're going to close on a 9 cap. So those are all things that you kind of have to consider when you're trying to buy below market, especially that first deal. It's the hardest, is that you might have to just take a good deal or an above average deal to get yourself access to great deals down the road.
Thank you, Charlie. Diane, I want to go to the next question here with you. And it's simply, do some people start with just a duplex? And we're talking about larger apartments, larger multifamilies. But if you do want to get into multifamily, does it have to be that large, or could you start small with a duplex? And
you could definitely start small with a duplex. We actually had 3 of our kids buy a duplex in house hack, and they all now have their own houses. But they started that way. That's how we started, with actually a single family, and just kind of built up slowly. And then when the 20 unit came up, we actually sold 3 of our properties that we had and used a 1031 exchange for the down payment.
Yeah, so a duplex is a great way to start.
Yes.
And your kids who started with a duplex and house hacked and lived in one side and rented out the other side, how did that work out for them as far as paying their expenses and basically were they able to live rent free on their side?
Yes, they were able to live rent free on their side, and then when they purchased their home and rented the other side, the rent from their duplex covers most of the cost of their new home as well. Yeah. So it's worked out very well for them.
It's great. Yeah, it's a great way. Best way to get started investing is to house hack like that. And we've done a lot of podcasts on the rental property owners, the rental property owner and real estate investor podcast. And there's all kinds of information out there on house hacking, but it's definitely a great way to go. And then, I'll stay with you on this question, Diane, and then feel free, everyone else, to jump in. But your advice on incentivizing tenants to pay their full lease cost up front versus month per month. So have you ever done this? Have you ever said, hey, I'll incentivize you to pay for the whole year up front and maybe give you a discount?
We've only done it a couple of times. Most people don't ask for that. Sometimes we require that as part of, because they didn't have quite, 3 times rent for income. Sometimes we'll say, okay, we'll, if you pay 3 months in advance at a time, then, we'll rent to you. But we usually don't do that. So we just expect rents due, the first of the month. And
Is there a reason why any of you would not do that, not accept a full year payment in advance?
We do not like to, we don't incentivize in period. The only time we really do is, and a good example of this is, let's say a foreign exchange student, they don't have they're on visa or a tax ID number. So those situations we do, but I try not to do this because I ran into this working with a local charity where they did that, and the tenant, great person, but they simply they were growing like tamarindo, and before we knew it, the basement was just completely filled with black mold, and it made it very difficult to evict because we had already collected rent for the entire year. So we try not to incentivize that, because if there's an issue, it makes it difficult to get rid of the tenant later on. Or if a tenant is smoking marijuana and I have 5 other tenants complaining about it, it makes it difficult to get rid of them, because I just don't want to deal with the complaining of 5 tenants. And I've even sold properties before where we've had issues just from that alone. So I can understand the want to get money up front, but personally, I just like to have it where they pay on a month to month. And it does worry me then too, that when that 1 year renews, because we had this happen one time where a person won the lottery, they won like $14,000, and they wanted to pay because they were so bad at managing the money. And then come around that 1 year when they didn't have that money more to use it anymore, we were evicting them. So I personally like to see that the tenant is comfortable with managing a month-to-month payment, especially when it's their housing payment.
I would say with a few exceptions, like your foreign student example, it's usually not a good idea to accept the full year's payment up front for a lot of reasons you just gave.
Oh, and I have tons of stories. I had somebody use drug money. I had somebody that basically used money they stole from the embezzled, and then the U.S. Marshals came down and knocked the door. So I have plenty of horrible stories for times when we've done that on top of just that. So
yeah, thank you for that. This person says, I am interested in commercial investing through a syndication to be a passive investor. So how does one go about evaluating various syndications that are easily found online, or various syndicators that are easily found online? That's a great question. I can certainly answer that, but I'm wondering if any of you want to jump in before I do.
I think syndicating is a fantastic model, both, you know, if you are a syndicator or if you're looking to be a passive investor. But it seems like, especially over the last 18 months, everyone's listened to a syndicating podcast or read a syndication book and has become a self-entitled syndicator. And so I see, I've seen like private placement memorandums on properties that we're marketing that are just, the numbers don't make any sense. So I think that you need to have a resource before you invest with anyone. You know, do they have their own money in it? What are the fee structures? There's a lot of questions that you need to ask, and, you know, what is their track record? There are groups out there who are doing it very successfully and have been for a long time. I would tend to skew that way, even if the returns, you know, promised are a little lower. They're probably more sure than somebody who's doing it for the first time and, you know, maybe doesn't really know what a real expense looks like on a certain line item and gets caught with their pants down to some extent. So I've seen over the last 12 months, especially, a proliferation of quote unquote syndicators who I would not throw $5 at, let alone, you know, a significant amount of money that they're probably requiring as a minimum investment.
Yeah. Charlie, I know you probably have some insight into this as well.
yeah, so I've done both. I've invested in passively, and then I've also been the general partner. So let's break this down, because oftentimes people break syndications into anything that's involving multiple partners. So syndications is securities offering. So when I invest in it, I'm investing it similar to like if I'm investing like kind of like a mutual fund. I don't have any say in what goes on the property, and there's general partners that manage it. Then there's your joint venture where you can be in it as an actual partner signing for the debt, which you would not do in a syndication. And you can do that via basically be a passive. So if I take on 20% or less, essentially, I can joint sign on that. And in that case, I would expect more return as an investor, because I'm also contributing to the securing of the financing, because ideally I'm more qualified. And then the third one being, obviously, is you could do it as a balance sheet guarantor. So in the case of agency debt, if I have the $1 million loan, a lot of times the agency debt will require net worth equal to that. So I can get a portion of the loan just by signing on specifically, because I'm still qualified to help secure it. So that's the third way as well. But I would say that it's getting increasingly more difficult to evaluate people, because like I was on a conference call where I was asking questions, and they were simply just ignoring my calls, taking on these questions that were not even substance questions. And then I'm like, well, hey, I didn't get my question answered. They're like, okay, email me your questions and we'll get back to it. I emailed them a day later. They're like, oh, we're fully funded. We raised $2 million in 20 minutes. And then it was like, wow. So it's getting very difficult in that sense. So one of the things I like to use is I want to look at track record and experience. If they don't have experience, that's fine. But then I want my risk and my return to reflect that. So on my first deals, like I did one 2 years ago, my investors got 137% return. And I flat out told them, like, you're never going to get that return from my deal, because that was my first deal. I gave you more equity because I know that you're taking a chance on me because I didn't have that proven track record. And so now every deal going forward, as I prove my track record, my return slowly goes down too as well. But the one thing I do like is I like to see what people did during the crash. If they're transacting before the crash, I want to see what happened. What did their investors do? So one of the investors I invested significantly to this day still, he actually brought his own money in the deal and kept it alive. And then he basically sold it at break even. He barely made any money off of it. But I knew that he treated our money like it was his own. And when it needed to be done, they brought their own money into. The operating agreement did not say he had to do that, but he did that. Track record obviously is important. But then also the third thing is the deal itself. I think you need a little bit of experience with evaluating these properties, whether that's taking a course on how to invest passive in other deals or just reading a book. You should have some experience, because otherwise if you're blindly investing, you might as well just invest in the stock market or something else that you have no knowledge about as well.
You can invest in individual notes as well and not necessarily a syndication. So I have a high net worth individual, private money. I bring a deal to him if he likes it, low LTV, all pretty much asset based. You can buy that note. They make payments directly to you, or you can buy a third of the note, and again, payments are made directly to you. So that way it gives you more control than maybe a syndication would.
Yeah, that's and that's a passive investment as well.
Yeah. 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just add a couple of things to that. If you're looking to invest passively in a syndication, the podcast that just came out Monday from that we did on the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor podcast, we spend the back half of that episode talking about evaluating the sponsors of these syndication deals, figuring out what their track record is, and how to gain a sense of whether or not they're reputable. And there's definitely some due diligence on your part as a passive investor into the track record and the results of the sponsor that you would be investing with, because there are a lot of great sponsors out there who have a great track record. Nobody hits 100% of the time. There's always going to be sometimes when you fall short of your pro forma and projections. But there are some very reputable people who do a great job. And then there, like Matt, like you said, there are some people where when you really dig into their numbers, it's a lot of stuff that just doesn't add up. So you have to be very careful in that regard.
One thing I do want to add to that, Brian, too, is that track record is important. But if somebody has been buying multifamily since 2011, there's a good chance that they benefited from a lot of environmental factors that happened. I mean, basically, if I bought a multifamily, even if I overpaid on it, like by 10% in the last 5 years, within a year, I basically was made into a profit. And I've had multiple clients that got a multifamily that mismanaged the property, but they just benefited from the market cap rates compressing. So that's why it's important to note too as well that, you know, they bought it right. That's one thing, but you also have to factor in too as well that, you know, the market itself has made a lot of people great investors simply because of the fact that it's appreciated so much too as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. The market has definitely benefited everyone, whether they were investing before 2008 or after 2008. Everyone has kind of experienced that boost in the market. What is a good and fair formula for charging back utilities? So we're getting back into the RUBS, racial utility billing system. For example, a duplex with one person in one unit and a 4-member family in the other. Obviously, if you're just going to split the utility bill in half, that's probably not fair because you've got one person who isn't using nearly as much as the 4-person family. Does anyone have a formula or a way to kind of break that down that would be fair to all parties?
We use square footage. So if a duplex is 1,000 square feet, one unit is 600, the other one's 400, then it'd be 60% of the bill and 40% of the bill the other. When you try to get into how many people, then it gets to be a little more difficult. And then obviously sometimes sometimes tenants do complain that's unfair because if I'm a 9 to 5 person, I live by myself and I'm barely ever there versus somebody that's got 3 kids and they stay at home and they're not working. Obviously, one person is using more utilities than others. So it's unfortunate, but we found the square footage method is the most objective to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. One suggestion would be if it is just a duplex and you do have that distinction, 4 people on one side, 1 person on the other side, maybe just take the average and give a flat rate for each side rather than trying to calculate it each month. Just say, okay, well, this side, because it is just 1 person, will charge this much. The other side, because there's 4 people, will charge this much, and we'll keep it flat and proportionate. That's one way I would consider handling that. Income is not going up significantly, but rents and other aspects of everyday life are more expensive. How does this happen? So income is not going up significantly, but rents and other aspects of everyday life. Oh, okay. I think what they mean are tenants' incomes are not going up significantly.
Right.
But yet the rents keep going up. So how long is that sustainable? Is this something that we're going to see from now on, or is there going to be a breaking point? Fred, what you want to take that one?
Well, there's a YouTube video called "The Pitchforks Are Coming," and it speaks to this very point where institutional money's coming in, with the multifamilies, and everyone's making money, but the hourly worker and which are primarily our tenants. So I think you're going to continue to see it strained and stretched. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but we have multi-billionaires building rockets and blowing themselves up into the stratosphere. And then we have other people who've had a job for 10 years and the wages is maintained the same. So that's like a socioeconomic question. It's not right. It's not fair. And if you watch that podcast, the pitchforks are coming. Eventually, something's going to snap somewhere, somehow. Yeah.
I think that wages, it probably hasn't totally got through the system yet, but in some ways wages are going up. If you're, I don't know what the minimum wage in Michigan is at the moment, but whatever it is, the starting wage anywhere you want to get a job right now is significantly higher than that because it's so competitive and people need labor so badly they're willing to pay. I mean, if you drive around Grand Rapids and you see all the help wanted signs at $17, $18, $20 an hour to start, that's what it takes to get employees now. So I think that you are getting, just because the free market dictates that to have an employee, you have to pay more than minimum wage or you're not going to get an employee. Wages are going up kind of naturally, probably not at the rate that which everything else is going up, but that's we could spend a lot of time delving into economics, 101 or 401 as it relates to that.
Yeah, that's a good question for Paul Isley, who's been we've done a segment with before. I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question, which is
I don't either.
Going up. It does seem to be going up, as well as savings and debt is going down, according to the charts I've been looking at. But everyone gets their information from different places. So, all right. Let's see here. What is the track record lenders are looking for when lending money to multifamily investors? That's a perfect question for you, Fred. What kind of track record do you like to see?
Liquidity cures all, right? And by liquidity, I mean, for those new, it's like the money you have in reserves and the capital to invest. So that cures all. So it's a balance. They're not, if you have a property management company, an experienced one, that takes some of their risk away of what this guy's, what this new multifamily investor is trying to do. So again, holistic approach to it. If you have great reserves and liquidity, you put maybe more money down. You have property management in place, or you've managed, 10 single family residences, that's great. It's the, I don't have any money, I don't have any experience, and I want to buy a 40 unit that's kind of incurable.
What about the person who says, I have the money, I don't have the experience or the track record, this is my first property, I'm going to buy a 20 unit and I'm going to manage it myself?
We can get it done. It might be, you might be putting more money down than maybe required. You might be paying a higher interest rate for that risk, but it's possible for sure.
Great. What is the best way to anticipate tax increases?
I'll take this one because I spend 4 of my 10 hours a day explaining this to out-of-state investors every day. Every assessor is different. And so the way that we do it, or the sort of most definite way that we found to do it, is to just take similar properties that have traded and have been reassessed, and then sort of triangulate between the assessment value, the assessment ratio compared to the purchase price, and the assessment, the reassessed value on a per unit basis, and try and triangulate with as much data as we can to get to, here's what we think the assessor is going to do in this instance. Michigan language is confusing because the way that the law is written, it says, 50% cash value, but they also can't chase sales. So how do you base 50% of cash value if you're not chasing the sale, which would indicate that you looked at the sale price? So every assessor is different in every municipality, and I would say, a local broker worth their salt can probably help you identify that, but it's an inexact science for sure.
It definitely is, and we do have a national audience right now. Is it different in every state? Yes. And if you're out of state, how would you go about it? I mean, I did talk to the broker. I mean, is there a go-to place, no matter where you are, to figure out what your taxes might be?
There are property tax consultants who just, especially for some of our institutional clients who are investing in multiple states and can't know the tax code in every single state, they'll hire, and I think it's like $750, per property that they do a kind of an assessment on. So that's the expensive way to do it. The less expensive way is to just read it up on it yourself and then look at comps that have sold. I would be wary of trusting, a listing broker's, they're incentivized to try and get someone to pay the most that they can for the property, which may include convincing them that the property taxes are going to be very low, when in reality they may go up significantly. So I would say whoever you're trusting, make sure that their fiduciary responsibility is to you.
Yeah, and I know in Michigan you can just Google Michigan property tax estimator, which will give you a pretty good ballpark idea of what your property tax can be, and it's through the state of Michigan. I'd imagine in many states you could probably Google property tax estimator for that state and find something that would help you. Okay, so does the inability to live in a 5+ unit property affected by ownership type, sole property versus LLC? Does the inability? Oh, okay, Fred, I think this goes back to you saying you can't live in your commercial property. If you own it in your own personal name versus owning it in an LLC, does it make any difference?
On a 5 unit, we're gonna loan to an LLC that's personally, and then you personally guarantee the loan. But you still sign covenants that you're not going to live there.
So it's actually in the covenants. I will not.
And a lot of them. Yep. This is not an owner occupied.
Could you rent from yourself?
If you get up into above 20 units, obviously they're not, putting that in there. But it's a commercial loan. Yep, and it's maybe doing LLC.
If someone really wanted to live in their 5 unit or 6 unit, is there a way to make it happen?
Yeah, close on the loan and, read it. If there's covenants, whether there's covenants or not, the lenders aren't coming around and looking in the window. So they put that covenant in there. So if you do move in there and you try to use consumer protection laws to avoid foreclosure, you can say, well, here's this saying you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't move in there, and that this is a commercial loan. So, yeah.
And it makes no difference. It makes no difference if it's an LLC or in your personal name, really.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and to add to that, I do know a very limited amount of lenders that do this, but it's very case by case. But the problem you have to factor in too as well, though, is that these commercial loans are on balloons. And so there's no guarantee they're going to offer that same product in 5 years when you try to refinance. So if you allow it now, there's no guarantee in 5 years that when you need to refinance or whatnot, that they're going to offer it again. So that's a huge risk at the back end that you run when you do that.
Yep. Under $5 million, they're offering 30-year fixed. Unbelievable. Yep.
Charlie, this question might be meant for you. What do you mean when you say leveraging your time? Do you mean researching? Do you mean digging for the deals rather than having the capital to win most obvious deals? How do we leverage our time here?
I've been a big proponent about watching time. And to give you a frame of reference, for 10 years, I basically worked 2 jobs. I worked a job in med tech sales while I was managing a $1 million real estate company. And then also I have 3 kids too as well. And so, one of the biggest things I look at time is that you have to know what your time is worth or what you think it's worth. So I get this question often, should I self-manage or should I manage myself? And I tell people, be honest, if you're making under $40 an hour, you don't want to have a management that is going to roughly cost you that, because every time they do something, you're like, oh, I could have done that myself. Whereas if I'm making $300 an hour, it's a no-brainer to use property management at that point in time. So that's the biggest thing, is knowing to leverage that. So for myself, I have a number in my head. Anything that costs underneath that, I outsource it. So my assistant, and even my assistant's time, I have 2 levels of assistants. One I pay one rate, one I pay another rate. So if I have laundry, I still do laundry. We've been considering doing it. I've even considered getting a personal chef, but I have certain things that cost. So cleaning the house, we pay somebody else to clean it, because that is going to save me. If I can spend 3 hours doing something else in real estate versus 3 hours cleaning the house, that'll allow me to leverage that time more appropriately to grow my business. So that's what I mean by leveraging time, is you got to know what it's worth, and then know when basically to leverage outsourcing it to somebody else versus doing a house. Another good example would be, whether I should do DIY. Somebody else might be charging you $50 an hour to do tile, and you get paid $40 an hour. But if it's going to take you 3 times as long to do it than them, then arguably you should hire it out. So that's what I mean by leveraging your time, is knowing what it's worth and knowing when to outsource it and when to keep it in the house.
All right. Well, we are over time now, so I'm going to wrap it up. And apologies to the questions we have not been able to get to, but we've had some great questions today. So thank you, audience, for asking those questions. I want to wrap it up by just going across the board here and asking for any parting advice for our listeners, kind of assimilating the questions you've heard today, the topics. Is there any thoughts you want to leave us with, or advice for the audience? And Matt, why don't we start with you?
I would just say that, this business is the most incredible business in the world. I think we're all lucky to get up and do whatever we do in the context of this business. What other, business are you one phone call away from making, $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million or $10 million? And I think, a lot of people get caught up in the minutia of technology. At the end of the day, this is still a relationship business, and I think it always will be. And the competitive advantage that you can have is having relationships with your vendors, with your brokers, with your partners. And, you can sit behind a computer screen but I don't think that those people are probably going to be the ones that excel. I think looking around the country at my clients who are the most successful, they are in front of people every day and truly treat it like a relationship business. So the real sort of commodity or value prop that is out there is being a people person. And so, yeah, that's my parting advice, I guess.
Thank you. Fred, anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, buy 5 units because I just devalued them all. So you'd be buying low and then you can sell it high. Just get out there, network. If it's not RPOA breakfasts, or they have several all month. If you're not in the Grand Rapids area, they're in Detroit. They're all over the country. There's meetups, and it's just a bunch of people doing the same thing you're doing. We're all out there in the trenches being entrepreneurs, and the real successful guy was helped out early in their career, and it's kind of a pay it back type situation that people will help you, and they want you to succeed. So get out there, network, shake hands, meet people, get involved, discussion boards, whatever. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you. Diane, your parting thoughts.
I would agree. Networking is great, great education, but also take advantage of some of the other, podcasts and, trainers that are out there to learn more as well.
Thank you. And Charlie?
Don't really have anything to add. What the 3 said before me is pretty much spot on. So I'll just leave it with what they said.
All right. Thank you. Well, I want to thank the 4 of you for bringing your A game today. You each had a very particular kind of niche, expertise, perspective that you brought to this conversation. And I really think it helped kind of fill out the bigger picture of investing in multifamily apartment real estate. Hopefully we've inspired some people to do that, or possibly help raise their game to a new level. And I just want to say thank you. You guys did a fantastic job. So we're going to go back to the floor now. And this is your opportunity to network. Just like Fred was recommending, network, get in front of people, talk to people, find out who's out there and what they're looking for. So thank you, everybody, for attending this session, and have fun networking.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.